Any volunteer? Achiro, you can go ahead. I can see your mic is on.
Good morning. Let's pray.
Good morning to you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning with thanksgiving in our hearts. We want to thank you for yet another moment that you have enabled us just to gather as a team, as a HR fraternity, to be able to learn, to be able to share with one another what we know, what we ought to know, and what we don't know, Jehovah Lord. How we pray that you may enable us in understanding and to get to share with each other our experiences, our knowledge, and expect to share and to be able to deliver within our various organizations. We thank you, we worship you, and we exalt your name, for this is our humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that. Thank you for that wonderful prayer. So for those that we have not met, my name is Rhoda Wairuko. I'll be your facilitator for the next 2 days that we are running this October CPD series with the CHRP. And Rhoda is a HR consultant, and I'm also a HR trainer with ACHRP, among many other training institutions. And ACHRP has organized this so that we are able to get our CPD points towards the renewal of IHRM membership. For these 2 days, you earn 2 CPD points. And for me, it's not about the CPD points, but also the capacity building and the knowledge, and also the refresher that we are going to do on matters performance management. And I'm really happy to have all of you. I'm a practitioner like most of you, and I hope a majority of us, we are in the HR field. And I'm looking forward to learning through this topic with you. I know if you are combined, all of us here, the over 20 of us that are in this panel, if you were to look at our cumulative working experience, I'm sure it will run into decades and also centuries of what we have acquired. So we have acquired one thing or two in our own workplaces, and also in terms of your practice wherever you are. And I hope you are going to connect. Maybe just to begin, you could, if you're able to unmute, I know there are those people who are multitasking and they're not able to unmute. Maybe I'll give the chance to the first 10 people. You just briefly introduce yourself, tell us your name, which institution you're coming from, whether you're in consultants, and maybe how many years of experience you've been in HR, so that we can also be able to see on which areas to tap and in terms of our contribution. I normally like having very engaging sessions where people are able to contribute, we are able to learn new skills, because for me, learning comes more from the practice than what is in the theory. Of course, we'll have the PowerPoint slides that we'll share with you, but at the end of the day is the sharing of experiences, because it's never black and white. Of course, we say the rules and the policies are very clear, but we understand that we don't operate in a vacuum, and there are other factors that probably could even influence the kind of experience that we have. The various tools that we are going to learn, how we apply, it also depends with the environment and also the industry that you're going back to, because it's not a straight cut jacket. So maybe the first 10 people, you could just kindly unmute quickly, tell us your name, which organization you're coming from, and how many years. My interest is how many years of experience you've had in HR, because you could be having 40 years of experience, but you have also worked in other diverse fields, which is also very enriching, because you're able to know how the business operates. So let's start. Just unmute yourself, a quick introduction before we begin. I'll see your mic kindly. Eunice Nderito, are you able to do that? Great.
Hello, good morning.
Jane. Hello, good morning, yes. Jane.
How are you? How is everyone?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, my name is Jane Mikwa. I work in Cafedeli, HR. My experience in HR, close to 2 years.
For 12 years?
No, not 12, close to 2.
Oh, yes. Okay. You said from which institution?
Cafedeli.
Oh, okay, great. And maybe you could just tell us one of your expectations when you look at this topic of effective performance appraisal system, so that we are able to also incorporate.
I think for me, my main interest is to build on what is already there. We already have a system, so probably just to build on it and make it more effective than in appraisal. Yes.
That would be great. Thank you, Jane. Let's go to the next person.
Thank you.
Karibu sana. Any other person who is able to unmute? Ellie, you can go. Sorry, Achiro, your mic, is it Ellie? Your mic is on, kindly proceed. Any other person?
Yes, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Uni is my name.
From Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. Over 8 years of experience in the HR. I'm attending this training. One of the expectation is to learn of any of emerging issue in performance management.
Emerging issues on performance management. Welcome, Eunice.
Thank you.
I'm happy to see you again. Let's go. Who else is able to unmute?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Fine. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you, Achiro. So just continue.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
This is Agnes. This is Agnes, not Achiro.
Oh, okay, great, Agnes. Continue.
Agnes Muchoi. I've had over 10 years of experience in HR. I'm now retired. And I'm trying to do some consultancy, which is not fully established as such. I'm also working with a church organization, a small group of employees. But expectation here is just to renew my understanding on effective performance appraisal, because I've been out of the service for over 5 years now. Yes.
That is great. Thank you, Agnes. Welcome. We are going to see to see how to run the ropes in terms of the performance appraisal. If you're called as a consultant by any of the organization, like the small organizations you're working with, what are some of the things you can take to them in terms of having an effective performance appraisal? Anybody else? Daniel, I see you want to speak. Before, I think we'll give Daniel and maybe one more person, then we can start it. We can start it off.
Good morning. My name is Daniel. I am having a problem with connectivity. I'm trying to join in. Yes, I hope I'm going to leave this platform with something. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel, and feel welcome. Daniel,
am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you very clearly.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for that. The final person to just give a chance to introduce themselves, then we can begin because of time. Yes, Irene. Irene, I can see your mic is on. Do you want to speak? All right, so we can leave it there. So that we are able to move. I know some of you have made other commitments and you need to be out of this webinar maybe by 11 because of the multitasking. I understand HR, we are very busy people. So our topic today, I can see now we are almost full house for the people who have joined us. I can see about 10 people have joined us as we are doing introduction. I'll just do another round of introduction for myself. I said my name is Rhoda Wairuko. I'll be your facilitator for the 2 days that you're running this webinar, which is effective performance management system. And this comes from the broader perspective of strategic performance management. And what I'm happy, the few people who have introduced themselves are here, they're already in the HR field. they already have performance appraisals in place, whether in terms of the forms, whether they are working or not, it's another story. If they are working, of course, they want to refresh themselves and to see what is it that you can do differently to make our performance management of the performance appraisal be more effective. One thing that I always tell my delegates is there is no one performance appraisal system that we can say is watertight or it's scientific, all that can serve all the purposes. However modest your performance appraisal tools are, or the system that you have, the efficiency and the effectiveness of that system depends with how we implement it. So again, as we begin, I'll also invite your indulgence, your engagement, your contribution. As we move on, you can always raise your hand. You can always put your comments on the chat. I'll look at them, and then we'll continue to engage as we proceed. So it's going to be a 2 days program. We ought to have started at 8:30, but I see we are starting a bit late. So we'll try to move so that we can cover that almost an hour late. But from tomorrow, we'll have all our systems ready so that we start at 8:30 and we finish by 11:30. And we'll have learned all that we need to learn, or maybe what we have prepared for you in terms of the performance appraisal system. So let me hear from you. When you hear performance appraisal, what is a performance appraisal and how is it different from performance management? Anyone can just unmute and tell us your understanding of performance appraisal and how it differs from performance management. Whether it's in a layman's term, there is no answer that is correct or not. Just to jog our mind, when you hear performance appraisal, is it different from performance management and how do they differ? Let's hear. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Just a minute.
That's Stella.
Oh, sorry. I had a client. Okay, to my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
Performance appraisal is
Mm-hmm.
part of performance management.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is basically it.
Okay, that's great, Stella. Thank you. Another person, what is performance appraisal? She says performance appraisal is a subsystem or part of the performance management. Any other contrary or additional opinion? Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Performance, what I can say, performance appraisal is part of performance management. Performance management is everything regarding performance.
It is everything regarding performance, including
where you set goals, you monitor the progress, you whatever. It includes everyone and everything. But performance appraisal is about you are just evaluating, where the work is being performed well or not.
That is very brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that elaborate explanation. Of course, we understand performance management is quite broad. It starts from the organizational level, where we are looking at the strategic planning. We comes to the enterprise performance plan. We have the departmental. We also look at our environment where we are operating and look at the SWOT analysis. And it comes all the way down to the individual employees. But when you look at the performance appraisal mostly focuses on the individual employee and the job that they are doing. So when you come to performance appraisal, we are actually looking at how we are able to set the goals, evaluate the efforts of the employee, and be able to actually measure and put some standards on how they have performed relative to the standards that we had set. And again, it also involves the review and the evaluation of that employee's performance to ensure that we can close any gaps that arises and we develop that individual. So when it comes to the development of the employee through the performance appraisal, it is quite broad. It does just not look at, we are measuring what you have done and what you have not achieved. So we also look at holistically the employee in terms of the development, because the main purpose of performance appraisal, it is actually to assist the employee perform better. It is just simply for performance improvement, because we are looking at the traits, we look at the personality, we look at the job aspects. For those who have done job analysis, when you look at a JD, of course, it has the aspects of the job responsibilities and the duties that an employee is able and should be able to do. And also it has the job specs. The job specs actually gives the competencies of an employee, and they are both in terms of behavioral, they're in terms of the traits, and they're also in terms of the work experience and some of the behaviors they're expected to exhibit so that they can perform that job properly. And why do you think performance appraisals are very important in any organization? Probably that's where we want to start our conversation, because I want us to start with a conversation, with a classical conversation between maybe two colleagues in an office, and why they think, why should we take all this time doing performance appraisal? Why do we as HR, when it comes probably to the mid of the year or the end of the year, we have to keep on sending those emails and the reminders, which are not very pleasant to the staff, that it's yet another time of the year that we need to take stock of what we have been doing through performance appraisal. That is the time we continue, and we continue sending the performance appraisal forms, the targets so that they can do the performance appraisal. Is it just for ticking the boxes? That we had this target as HR officers that we want to do performance appraisals every year, twice a year or every year. And now we have to take an inventory and tick the boxes and say, of course, 100% of the employees have done the performance appraisal. But what is the main purpose? What is the essence of performance appraisal? Let me hear. Thank you, Hortense, for bringing that out. I want to hear from someone else. We are here to learn from each other. Any other? Why is it so important? And I want you to respond to this from a perspective of you, an employee, before you come to the organization where you stand as HR. For you, when we have an effective performance appraisal in your workplace, how does it make you feel? Tell me. I want to hear. Because we are also appraised as HR, aren't we? Ada, can you tell us something? If you're able to unmute. Or any other person? Why do you think performance appraisal is very critical? It's very important that we have to spend all this time learning and also doing it every year. Is there anyone who want to respond? Yes. Carry on, proceed.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on. You have put your mic on mute again. Please unmute. Yes, now we proceed.
Can I proceed?
Yes, proceed.
Oh, the reason why there is performance management is because we in an organization, everyone is there for a purpose. So that's where there's performance management, to see whether you are meeting the expectation, your expectation and the company expectations.
Okay, that's good.
That's why it's very critical. And for you to meet your expectation, you must know what the company wants from you.
Great. So it's a way of gauging the meeting of expectation, maybe from the organization perspective and also from the employee's perspective. That's very beautiful. Ada, I can see you were trying to speak. Then you went back and muted. I think that's fair enough. Let's proceed. So let's see what we have prepared for you this day in terms of the performance. So for the 2 days, we are going to look at what is performance appraisal, which basically we have explained. We are going to describe the purpose of performance appraisal, as he had talked about. We're also going to look at how we define the goals and the work efforts for the employee. And then we're also going to look at what are performance criteria and also the steps that we should be following in the performance appraisal. And probably we look at some of what happens in the workplaces. Do we follow those steps? Are there steps that we are missing and could be making maybe our performance appraisals less effective? And then we're also going to look at who should be doing the appraisal. Is it the HR? Is it the line manager? Is it the employee? Is it the peers? Then we look at some of the various methods of performance appraisal. And we will look at several of them, that is today and tomorrow. We'll begin with some today and then we'll continue tomorrow to just see actually what are some of the methods, and then we'll look at for their advantages and their disadvantages. Then we're also going to reflect back to the workplaces and see which one are we applying and should we change it, or how can we tweak it so that it becomes more effective. Then we're also going to look at the importance of performance, the importance, sorry, my screen is having issues. Then we're going to look at the importance of appraisal interviews. And do we conduct appraisal interviews in our workplaces? Do the line managers and the supervisors who are doing the performance appraisals of their employee conduct the performance interviews? And why are they important? Then we're going to look at some of the requirements of an effective performance appraisal systems, what we can do, and again, we're also going to look at some of the errors that occurs in performance appraisal. And by the end of those 2 days, I think we'll be in a better position to refresh ourselves, to see what we can change and how we can do that. Irene is saying, kindly allow me to listen in. My mic seems to have issues. My apologies, will participate in the chat. Thank you. So keep on posting those posts. So as we have discussed, let's look at a conversation between 2 colleagues in a workplace who are talking about the performance appraisal. And the 2 colleagues here we are talking about is Chris and Mike. So for Chris, Chris is actually a bit worried of what is happening in the workplace. And he's saying, there's a conversation which will just follow. This is now Michael to Chris, and he's saying, hi, Chris, what happened? Why are you so tense? So they are maybe just seated in the office, and one of them is quite tense, and the other one is wondering, why is Chris actually so tense? And the conversation goes, Michael, I'm hoping to get the promotions to the senior manager's position that has opened in my department. And he says, of course you will, why not? And he's saying, who knows, maybe they would choose Tom instead of me. And then Michael asked him, why him of all the people? And he says, it's just that he's so good at impressing people. He's, however, being sweet. He's forever being sweet and nice and doing the sweet talking. That happens a lot in the workplaces. There are people who are very good at sweet talking, playing politics, nudging people's ego, but yet they are not performers. And then they continue and say, yes, that is true, but he doesn't have anything to show as far as work goes. You are the best. So he knows he's the best in the work. I hope they remember that he just sweet talks. I just hope that they see I'm the one who has brought them their best projects. And we say, of course, they will. Did you forget the performance appraisals? And he remember, oh yes, now I'm feeling a lot better for hearing this. Does this happen in our workplaces? But you can see the confidence that is in Chris and Michael, that because they know they have a performance appraisal system that is working in the organization, when we come to performance, the promotions of employees, maybe to senior position, they will consider, or probably they factor, the results of the performance of the employee into the promotions. Probably when we were having a symposium and we had the same content, some of the employees actually said, in our organization, when you are doing promotions, the performance appraisal of an employee actually contribute to 40% of the scores of the interviews for the internal promotions. What would you say of your workplaces? How many of you have factor performance appraisal results when you're coming to internal promotional interviews? Let me hear, let's hear. How many? Maybe by show of hands? On your reaction, how many consider and what percent do you consider when you're coming to promotions? The previous performance appraisals. Of course, performance appraisals are reactive and they are backward looking because we look at the history of the person's performance. How many of you have factored when you are doing your promotional interviews or evaluations, you consider a certain percent or a weighting to that decision making of a promotion? How many? Do we have anybody? Or we just do the performance appraisal, file them, and wait for the next cycle? How many of you do that? None? Really? How many factor that? By show of hand? Mary, you do that? Mm-hmm. So that is one of the indicators of saying maybe why it is not effective. How many of you use the performance appraisal to give bonus, or what we call maybe for other people, the 13th? Jane Mikwa says they do. What percent? You can type on the chat. What percent or what weighting does it carry in the promotions? And how many of you have compensation-based incentives like bonuses? One notch increment because you have performed better than the other. How many? So those are some of the things that you may not answer to me, but you need to reflect on them. So let's move. And what the two guys are discussing is just the importance of performance appraisal and how they feel it, and they feel better about the performance appraisal they have. So when you're looking at performance appraisal, we say performance appraisals will help Chris management to record and measure the performance of each of their employees. So when the decision of choosing the new senior manager has to be taken, they can rely on those results of the performance appraisal to choose the most suitable candidates and not just the sweet talkers. So Chris feels better that during the performance appraisal, he'll be able to clearly outshine Tom, as Chris is definitely a better performer than Tom. So let's look at what is performance appraisal. And as we said, performance appraisal is the process that is used to evaluate the personality, the performance, and the potential of the employee in an organization. So it looks at the employee in terms of their behaviors, their personality, the performance which is job related, and also looking at the potential. And that is when we come to the appraisal, when you're looking at the targets we give them, how they have achieved, and we also look at what is that potential. Potential are the gaps that we establish, and then we work on them so that we can raise the performance of this. And of course, we know there are many performance intervention measures that can be. One of it could be training. It could be review of the job. It could be other capacity development issues, and also maybe issues like mentorship and also the coaching that come in the workplaces. So we say performance appraisal, it is a process of evaluating and communicating to an employee how she or he is performing. Of course, we have heard it is about clarifying the expectation of the job and also that of the employee and establishing a plan for improvement. So hence we say it is a system of review. Here we review and evaluate job performance to assess the accomplishment to evolve plans for the development of the employees. So some of the definitions that we had, some of the classical definition we could say, it is performance appraisal means evaluating an employee's current or the past performance relative to his performance standards. Of course, we understand the performance standards have to be set in advance before we come now to review and establish the gaps. So according to Neustron is now the organizational behavior book, and mostly he normally talks and concentrate on the human behavior at work to review the organizational behavior. So he has written a book called Organization Behavior, and he has actually, if you look for the book, he has elaborated how the human behavior affects the performance and affects how they carry out their duty. So according to him, it is the process of evaluating the performance of employees, sharing that information with them, and searching for ways to improve their performance. What do you mean by saying sharing the information of performance with the employee? What does this entail? What does this entail? What is sharing of this performance information with the employee?
Giving them feedback.
Giving them feedback. It could also involve communication. And what are some of the tools in the workplaces that we use to give feedback to our employees to performance? It could be one-on-one meetings, interviews. Which other way can we give feedback? Which other way do we give feedback? Guys, I want to hear more from you. Which other way do we give feedback? Interviewing. Some of us do the interviews. Then we say it is the step where management finds out how effective it has been at hiring and placing employees. We also say that performance appraisal is actually a reflection of how well as HR we are performing other functions of the HR. And this starts from the recruitment. How an employee performs actually is able to help us gauge how competitive, how well, how strategic we were as HR in terms of the recruitment, how we train our employees, how we onboard them, the culture of an organization. Actually, it's a reflection of how the results of the performance appraisal. Then it is also recommended that in addition to an annual formal performance appraisal, we should be able to be holding informal conversation with an employee, not sitting and waiting until the end of the year. That is when now the HR has to generate an email to ask for people's appraisal. Do we have these conversations on non-going, as an ongoing, or do we wait until now HR has to send that email saying we have to do the performance appraisal? And if it requires HR to do performance appraisals once in a year, how many of our supervisors and line manager take the initiative of doing midterm reviews, quarterly, monthly monitoring, and keeping records of that so that that can be accumulated for the end of the year? Let's share experiences. What happens in our workplaces? Do you wait until the end of the year or the end of the half year? Or do we do continuous monitoring and having those conversations with employees? Jane Kingara, what happens in your workplaces? Or any other person who is able to unmute? What happens? Probably that's a conversation you should be having with yourself, because those are some of the things that determine the effectiveness. So let's look at the purpose of performance appraisal. And for the employees, of course, it offers direction. When you are very clear in your mind, this is what I'm expected to do. That comes in form of clear JD. When an employee has a clear JD, they know from the onset, this is what is expected of me in this job that I'm holding. And once now you come up with the performance targets, then you're able to know that I need to move from point A to point B. And once that is very clear, it is able to, we can say that the performance appraisal, because of the way we set our targets at the beginning of the performance period, the continuous monitoring that we are doing, and end of the year or the end of the half-year appraisal, it offers you direction. So you are able to know when you are making progress, whether you are stagnating or where you need to put your effort on. So you are able to know with clarity the direction you need to go. It also provides feedback about their performance. You can imagine a situation where you go to work every morning and nobody gives you your feedback about how you are performing. You don't feel like you're progressing as an individual. But when you're offered that feedback about your performance, it also lifts your morale and you feel more motivated because there is feedback. Of course, the feedback can be positive feedback and it could also be negative feedback. And we're going to look at maybe the scenarios where the manager has to give feedback. At times, the way you give the interviews, the feedback depends with the situation. You can imagine it is very easy for a manager to give feedback to an employee who is performing, who is promotable, who is doing very well. Of course, that's a very easy discussion to have and a very exciting one. But then you also find yourself that you're the same person who has to give feedback to maybe an employee who is a good performer, working very hard, but there are some aspects about this employee that makes them probably not promotable to the next position. Of course, there is also another category of employees who are not performing, and again, they are not even promotable. So how do you coil your discussion with such employees? So we say performance appraisal provides that feedback. Then it also provides input for improvement, because until feedback is given that you are able to evaluate the actual from what it was expected, then you'll see the gaps. It actually shows the gap in terms of the performance, and it gives the input for improvement. Which areas of job performance does employee need to work on or to improve on? Could it be job related? Could it be behavioral? Is it about building their competencies? Is it about learning and more being proactive and agile? And when you're looking at this intervention for poor performance, you'll actually see that it is both ways. It is just not the responsibility of the employer to be doing all that, including training, capacity building. Of course, the employee is also expected to put their weight in it in terms of being proactive, in terms of developing themselves, going back to school, working on their competencies, and establishing those areas they need to work for. Then it offers motivations for future level of effort and task. It gives that kind of direction. Then finally, we say it clarifies task perception of the employees. Then moving forward, we say again, still for employee, it helps to identify employee strengths and also the weakness. So performance appraisal, it is actually a way of weighing the employee. So you're able to know, even when you're looking at the feedback, what are these areas of performance that an employee is so strong on, and what are some of the weaknesses? And again, when it comes to effective performance appraisal, we also need to understand what is it that we are measuring. Actually, that is the most critical. How we set our targets, are they job related or are they just behavioral? Are we able to analyze an employee's JD and look at those functional behaviors or the attributes that they need to employ on the work so that then we can come and measure them? Or do we base our appraisal or evaluation of an employee on just the perception? So we should be able to help the employee walk that journey of evaluating their strengths and also their weaknesses. Then it also provides coaching, counseling, career planning to subordinates. In fact, those are some of the interventions we have when you do the performance appraisal. Then it also gives an employee the work satisfaction and also the motivation for knowing that they are performing on their role. Then it also helps in terms of the personal development. We said the employee should take the initiative of developing themselves. Then let's look at it from the lenses of the organization. Why is performance appraisal so important? And the first issue, we say it ensures proper documentation of performance, because if an organization does not have an inventory of performance goals, the targets which they draw from the strategic plan and also the enterprise operational plan, then they'll not be able to know whether they are going towards their strategic maybe direction. So it helps the organization to focus and to keep a proper documentation on how people are performing, and also to see the areas that they need to work on, so that by the end of the year, by the end of the strategic period, the organization will have attained its strategic goals. It also offers legal protection, especially when you have to take disciplinary measures, when you have to terminate employees on performance-based ground. Then when you have proper documentation about the discussions you've had on performance, right from the targets, the agreements, the actual results that comes out of the performance appraisal, and you also have the interventions of that you have tried as an employer to put in place, then it will offer you that backup in case of any litigations. But of course, at this point, we also need to understand how do we terminate employees on performance grounds? Do we apply the same principles of the disciplinary procedures like any other when we come to procedures? Should this employee be accorded a hearing, a fair process? Are they given a room to defend their positions? What kind of documentations do we need in terms of going through the whole process? I think that is something we really need to understand. And of course, we'll hear maybe some people sharing maybe cases that went so after maybe terminating an employee on grounds of performance. And of course, with the emerging issues, you can see even with what is coming from judiciary and the case laws, of course, it is shaping how we used to do administrative issues like termination of employees on performance, especially when they are on probation. Before, and when you look at maybe the Employment Act, it was probably not a requirement that in terminating an employee who is on probation, that we had to apply all the principles of disciplinary management. But that now it's changing, that if you were to, you didn't even actually have to give a reason for that termination. But looking at the recent judgments that are setting precedents, now it has become a requirement that for you, even to terminate an employee who is on probation, you must give reasons. And mostly for probation, apart from maybe integrity issues and the background issues, one of the main reasons that we used to use is performance, that during the probation period, the employee didn't perform to the expected target, so we extend the probation period and we could easily terminate without giving any reason or according them any disciplinary hearing or any fair procedures. Now that is changing. So we have to be very careful on the documentation that we put and how we administer that. Of course, it creates a motivational system throughout the organization, because when an individual employee is happy about the performance appraisal and knowing that the performance appraisal will count in terms of the other decisions and personnel decisions and personal decisions that affect them, then that raises their motivational level. So across the board, the organization, when the performance appraisal is working, then it lifts the motivation status in the organization. They know that they can rely on performance. They know when we do the performance appraisal, it is not going to be based on a supervisor's feeling. Recent occurrences that happened, whether they like me where I come from, it is going to be based on objective targets that were already jointly agreed at the beginning of the period. And it is basing on that we'll sit back and maybe I'll be given an opportunity for self-appraisal before we discuss, so that we don't have other biases coming into it. Of course, we are going to look at some of the errors. Then, for decision relating to promotions, as we have seen the case between Chris and Michael, and Chris is very confident, and you can see the motivation in that organization. They really trust their appraisal system. Decisions on termination on employees on grounds of maybe performance, the layoffs, probably when we have to do the redundancies, do we base it on performance? What other criteria do we use when we want to lay off, or maybe we want to restructure the organization? And also merit pay increases. Of course, in some organizations, there are organizations that they base their salary increments on the performance. Of course, we are going to look at probably the benefits and the maybe the advantages and the disadvantages of that, where you look at the performance appraisal of an employee, that if an employee has scored the highest, the 5, they get a bigger salary increment in terms of the percentages. Or when an employee is not performing, probably at 1 and 2 being the lower, then they miss out. Maybe they may miss out on the promotion and also the merit increment, or what we call the annual increment. Of course, that will not work in government because we already have established salary structures. And some of the other factors that also limit that is when an organization have unionizable employees, and we have what we call the CBAs and all that, and they put limitations into that. And then it also provides input for training and also the development needs. Of course, what we say, when you look at your performance appraisal tool, when you're coming to the end after measuring the work competencies, the job objectives, and also the competencies, it gives room for capacity building and the discussions on which areas of training or capacity building does the employee desire to be exposed to, or what does the supervisor recommend. Of course, that is one of the tools we use when you're coming up with our training plan. So we base it on the TNA if we have conducted a training needs analysis, and we also collect that data from the performance appraisal. So performance appraisal for us in HR is not just to tick the box, file them. Of course, I've had a lot of people admitting in our workplaces, once we do the performance appraisal, we just file them. Because I was asking most of the staff in the HR and HR practitioners, when you do the performance appraisal, what happens? I tick the box, I file them. Are they just to be filed? Do even as a HR take your time to go through the organizational or departmental performance appraisal to even establish what are the cross-cutting gaps that we have? What are some of the trainings that people are asking for to be able to? You could find that some are basic trainings like Excel. Do we harvest data for our decision making in terms of the training plans from that? Or how does our forms look like? Do they give that room that apart from the engagement between the employee and the supervisor, there is also an engagement of HR between the employee, the supervisor conversation, and you functionally, you also engage with them by reviewing those forms. Do they give that? That is something we actually need to look at. Then let's proceed. That's for the organization, and I hope you are all following. So it also gives feedback and clarifies management expectation. When the management gives you the job description, which has the job responsibility and the job specification, when the organization sets what we call the organizational or the enterprise-wide operational plan, which they pick from the strategic plan, and they cascade that to the individual employees through what we call individual work plans. And the other question I'll pose to you, do your employee have individual work plans that they sign and jointly agree and co-sign with the supervisor at the beginning of the period? That is a way of clarifying the management expectation. They give the expectation that we have recruited you, we have given you these benefits, we expect you to deliver this by the end of this period. So it also gives input to validation of selection procedures. That when us in HR, we are going for recruitment, how do we base the performance appraisal or the performance management to be able to do a competency-based kind of a selection? That when you go to actually set the selection criteria, we are looking at some predictable or predictors that can actually show that if we are able to select an employee with these competencies, with this qualification, with this level of experience, then they are more likely to perform better than the people who miss that. So we keep on modifying that. So performance appraisal is a tool that gives input to validation of the selection procedure. And we normally use that as just the predictors. Actually, I call that predictors. But when they come in, how they perform becomes the evidence. So the performance appraisal is evidence-based kind of a tool, whereas those things we put in the selection, we call them predictors of good or poor performance. Then it also gives input to human resource planning, because we plan in terms of how many, of course, when we do the job analysis, you can be able to know to complete this task, you need this number of man hours. So the manpower planning and the effort comes to light. When you are doing the training planning, it is also part of the human resource planning. When you're doing your budgets, how much budget do you need to build the capacity to train and to actually have the interventions of the training needs that you have established so that you close the performance gap. So those are some of the plannings that you do. Then it's to take measures for employees' improvement in terms of what has come out from that appraisal. And then we are able to take measures on how to actually do their improvement. Of course, the cross-cutting intervention you'll always hear from HR is that we need to we need to train more. We need to train our employees on this as an intervention. But when you look at and we take performance appraisal seriously, you might even come to realize maybe some of the reasons that an employee is not performing could be out of attitude, could be issues attributed to personal traits. You know, the inherent traits of an employee that is inbuilt could be an accelerator of their performance, or it could be a limitation. So how do you work on that? Is that training? And what kind of training are we talking about? Could it be soft skills? And could it be it has to come from the employee to change their attitude and to work on them? Those are some of the conversations you need to have. Then it helps to focus employees' effort to achieve company strategic goals. Of course, we heard when we talk about performance management, it is very broad. It starts from the strategic planning, where the organization come up with their strategic goals and objectives, which are cascaded to the organization, to the department, and to the employees. So when we have an effective performance appraisal, it helps to focus employees' effort towards achieving. So we are pulling all in the same direction. Then it helps to identify employee strengths and weaknesses. We've talked about that. Assessment of employees' potential and performance, because I say that the gaps in performance and management could be a reflection of the employee's potential, or could also be a reflection of the potential of the organization, because probably we have not equipped them. We have not given them the tools. Maybe we have misaligned our employees and we expect them to perform. And that is why we say garbage in is garbage out. If you failed as a HR in the recruitment, of course, you'll also struggle with all the other processes of HR. You'll be struggling with training because you'll be training people who are untrainable, probably because they didn't have the capacity, because your recruitment probably was based on other factors rather than the qualifications and the needs of the businesses. How do we do the recruitment? Do we base it on the pains of the business, the gaps we have established, and now we want to come and plug, or our recruitment is just putting a bum on a seat because we have been pushed that we have to recruit this number of people and just place them? But are we looking at their qualifications and the competencies and the fit and the requirement of the business? So if you get it wrong from the recruitment, you will struggle with all the other processes. Even your planning will not fall in place. Your interventions will not fall in place because you're only left with termination as an option, which also exposes you to litigation. Then it also helps the organization to maintain control because they're in control of the performance and the activities of the employees. That is the purpose, and now we can clearly understand what is performance management. And before we go to the defining of goals and efforts, I want to maybe see your comments. I want to hear your reaction. Any additions, any clarification as we proceed? Of course, I can see Milka said we evaluate quarterly and final analysis at the end of the year. That's very beautiful. Of course, when you do the quarterly, at times, the quarterly may not be a requirement in the HR, but it's a way of pushing that constant. And you can find maybe the quarterly, you can do cumulatively and do the average at the end of the year. Or it could be the quarterly, it is for the purpose of the employee and the department and the supervisor. We don't keep so much record, or that is not factored in the end. So it is a way of having that continuous. Then other is also saying performance discussion should be continuous, not waiting until the end. Of course, Milka has said, yes, we average at the end of the year. And I would also want to hear from Milka, if you're able to unmute or maybe write your comments. Of course, we had a case where one of the HR manager was saying, how do you do the quarterly one or the half year? And the challenge she had in their workplace, the supervisors or the management has dictated when you're evaluating your employee, you base it on 50%, not a full percent. Of course, we see some of the activities are time-based, and I hope we'll be able to see how we set the targets, and we look at how they need to be smart, that they must have a timeline, they must be quantifiable. So if I'm supposed to maybe deliver 10 sales, or let's say I have a target of 120,000, maybe number of accounts by the end of the year. Now, when you come to the first quarter, how are we supposed to appraise that? Do you take whatever they have achieved and divide it by 50 because you are half year? Or how do we do our appraisal? That is the challenge she had, because she had, of course, that one you can be able to cluster it and to break it into bits. Like if 120 is supposed to be brought in 12 months, then half a year you're supposed to bring 60. And then a quarter you're supposed to. So you base it on that. So Eunice is saying, what do you do to a staff who after a period of 5 years start performing poor, following frequent discussions, even up to setting KPIs, and staff fails to meet their targets? Of course, what you do is to analyze. It is hard that an employee will, after 5 years, they just suddenly change. What has changed? Is it their attitude? Has he been promoted to a point of incompetency? Because there are employees who are very good workers and perform very well at their workplaces. And then even when you're doing the promotions, we just base it on performance and not look at the other factors that should come in. And we end up promoting people to the highest level of incompetency. Could that have happened? And by the time they start performing poorly, have we been holding discussions? We should be able to understand which areas and what has changed. Because if they've been performing, what has changed? Is it the targets that have become so stiff? Has the leadership changed? Is he getting the guidance? What has changed? There must have been something that has changed that. And when you have those feedback and conversation with an environment of trust, you are able to dig out what are the changes that have happened. Some could be job related. Some could be not job related. Maybe his motivation has gone. Maybe his attitude. Maybe he has been moved to a position that he doesn't have the competencies. A follow-up on the same, the staff does other people's jobs so well and her performance declines. So he's concentrating on other people's job and leaving his. Could that be the case? Let's help Eunice understand that, because you have to do a whole discussion around it. What has happened? There must be a line of change. Maybe the motivation, the leadership, has the structuring of the job changed? Are we still giving the same energy and the effort to the employee in terms of equipping him, giving him resources? Have we continuously developed them? Because it is hardly that employees will be performing, but how we do our performance appraisal, you'll see a supervisor scoring an employee 5, 5, 5, 5. Yet this employee has a lot of gaps. Then suddenly, when there's a change of leadership, then maybe someone is more lenient, the other one is not lenient. We look at maybe those are some of the errors and what could have happened. Milka is asking, I'm interested in the tool that Milka Njoroge is using to do a summary of performance management reports. Milka is the one who said they normally use a particular weighting or a percentage to consider even for promotion. Is that so, Milka Njoroge? That's why I encourage conversation, so that you tell us what is it that you're doing and what is working well for you. Any? Milka, are you able to unmute and tell us, share your experiences? He said we evaluate quarterly and final analysis of the year. Performance. The first is set targets at the beginning of the period. Once we set the targets, then you should be able to break your target to change the tool. You appraise them on quarterly basis. If you're able to split that, also come up with guidelines, maybe for a HR manager. If the target for you is to have an approved HR policy by the end of the year, of course, you should not say by the end of the year, but by 31st December 2022. Then you should be able to break that target into maybe 4 clusters. And what I've seen as working, we develop a guidelines like for the activities that are not quantifiable, that are quantitative, are qualitative, and spread and to be achieved by the end of the year, you'd come up with criteria like, if you have made the first draft by Q1, you should have the basic draft. Then you score probably, if you have the first draft, you get maybe 30%. If you have subjected this first draft to the management discussion, because that should be the first line. It has gone through the management discussion, the management have given you a clean bill of health and recommended that you could continue, then probably you score another 20%. So you are at 50% of that goal. If this policy ought to go through probably a HR committee of the board for them to discuss and recommend it to the board, if you have now done with you have discussed, you have tabled this in your HR committee, you have discussed with the HR committee and they are agreeable, then you get maybe another 20%. So you're already at 70% of that score by maybe Q3. If this policy, of course, the policies must be approved by the board because that is the work of the board, like policy approval and also the strategy. If you are at that point and you know it has not been approved, instead of scoring a 0 because it has not been approved, you can score 70% because you have the 30 for the draft, you have the 20% for the management discussion and approval, you have the 20% for the HR committee recommendations and approval. All what you're missing is the last leg of 30 minutes for the approval. So gradually you end up having those guidelines, but those guidelines actually, they have been very well defined and articulated and put as part of the guidelines. And if you have to come up with a performance management policy, now those are the guidelines you put in that policy. And those are the discussions you also have, because we should be having performance appraisal discussions with the senior management at departmental levels and also at individual levels so that you're able to come up with those clearly understood guidelines. But if we don't have those discussions, then we are not able to come up with such initiatives. Any other before we go to defining goals and efforts? I'd want to hear your voices more if you're not tasking than the discussions. I would really want, because that really helps us share the experiences we have. We said apart from going through the slides and hearing from the facilitator, we want to hear from each other. This is a club of many HR practitioners. I said we are holding centuries of the work experience. Anybody who is able to unmute before we proceed for the benefit of the others? Or to share any experiences, what it has reminded you as we are going through the discussion? Any? Okay. Silence, may I take silence to be the concurrence that we can proceed? Let's keep on posting and hearing from each other. So let's look at how do we define goals and work efforts. Of course, when the earlier speakers were talking about, they said performance management is broad. It is about setting efforts, the work efforts, defining goals that are smart, and going to the implementation and also the execution of the same. Queen, welcome. So when you're defining goals and the work efforts, we say the main purpose for any organization to exist, which is this mission, is to make sure that all the employees we have in our workplaces are pulling towards the same direction. And how we know that all the efforts and the employees are pulling to the same direction, it is when we come to the strategic planning and we set, in the strategic planning, we have very clear vision. Of course, the vision is the direction, all where the organization desires to be, that they want to move from point 1 to point 10. They want to move from point A to point B. They want to move from point X to Y or to Z. So once we come up with that vision of the organization, then we have the mission. The mission of the organization is why we coexist. And then from then, we also draw the values. How are we going to go where we go in terms of how are we going to behave, how we are going to carry ourselves, what is it that we value in terms of the core goals. And those three in mind, then we set up the clear strategic goals of the organization. It is the strategic or the roadmap, the blueprint of the organization. So when you're defining goals and the effort, it starts right from the strategic plan so that we ensure that every employee is going the same direction. So how we do that, we ensure the performance management of the organization starts from the strategic planning, cascading the same to the organization and the department. Also, when you're coming to set the targets of the employees and coming up with their JD, it should be talking to the vision and the mission and the goals of the organization. And even the performance targets that we are going to have, they actually should be cascaded from the organizational operational plan and also the departmental plan, so that when we add all the constituencies of that organization, they are all adding up to the common goal. And we say for this purpose, it is crucial that the company should define well, of course, I'm using the same, defined, well-defined, or should be able to establish well-defined, clear goals and work efforts to each employee. So when you talk about the work efforts, those are the JDs, the job responsibilities, and what they are supposed to do. We must make it very clear what we expect of an employee. And the employee should be empowered by knowing what is expected of them. Then we say each employee should clearly know their goals and work efforts and should know towards which direction they are working towards each day. That when an employee comes to the workplace every day, they should know by the end of the day, I should have done this amount of work. And when I put this amount of effort, this is what I expect to come up in terms of the result and the outcome and how it adds to the bigger picture of the strategic goal, including your drivers. Do you discuss strategies with them, your strategic plan? Are you able to break it down in their own language that they can understand how their work effort of maintaining those vehicles, driving the senior managers, doing whatever they do to see the clients or your stakeholders, how they are contributing to the bigger picture of the strategic goal? That when you take your work so seriously, when you do that, you're contributing to the big organizational. And even when you're setting goals for them, please ensure it resonates with the strategic plan. It resonates with the strategic goal, the mission, why we are there as an organization, so that even the cleaners should be able to know, if I do this, if I clean the corridor so clean and so well, I'm going to minimize maybe the accidents. I'm going to give people a happy working environment, and they'll be able to do the work that they're assigned to do. Then it is also essential that the goals and the work effort defined should be specific. Of course, they should be measurable. Specific means they should not be vague. they should be very specific on what you want an employee to do. And every target that you give or every goal, it must be measurable. There must be a way of measuring. And this is how now you establish the performance criteria. What are the standards that are set that will actually show me at the end of the period whether this has been achieved or not, whether the behaviors that has been put it is good behavior or it is adding towards the achievement of the goal. So you should be able to have those measurable standards or the threshold that can show you that whether we are performing or not. And it can distinguish a performer from a non-performer. Then when we define these goals, they must be challenging. Of course, we say they should not be so easy to achieve, and they should not be so hard for the employee to achieve that they're impractical to achieve. And they should be practically feasible, and they should also encourage participation among the employees. Then this is something we have had in all our training. Anybody who have had any opportunity to be trained in HR or in any management course, we have had and we have seen that our management goals or the goals of an employee in terms of their performance, they must be SMART goals, or the targets must be SMART. And SMART, I think this is just to re-emphasize and to refresh ourselves. We say they must be specific and clearly state the desired results. We must know what is required of them and where we are going. Then they must be measurable. When you talk about the measurable, we must be able to answer the question, how much effort should I put? How much sale should I bring? How many employees should I recruit? How many training hours should I deliver as HR? How many employees should I be able to retain when you come to attrition rate or the staff turnover? How much money should I save? How much sales should I bring? So it is answering the question, how much? Of course, we are going to see some of the metrics we can use when you're measuring this. Then they must be attainable. We said not too tough for the employee, and they should not be too easy. And then they must be relevant on the job and what is to be achieved so that we remain objective. And then they must reflect the time. In terms of when you're setting a SMART goal, we must have the deadline, the timelines. That is mandatory. So if you're able to put all those aspects in a performance appraisal, when you're setting and the planning the goals, then that should be able to be very easy. If actually one of the biggest failures we have when it comes to performance appraisal is the failure to plan. Failure to agree on SMART goals and targets, and failure to agree. So we find a lot of our line manager are reactive. That when now we initiate the process of performance appraisal, it's when now the staff and the employee and their supervisors are beginning to hold that conversation. By the way, what were we supposed to do as a department? By the way, what were you expected? So you find we are at a point of performance appraisal, but we don't have any plans. We don't have agreed targets. So how are we supposed to do the performance appraisal? So it becomes subjective. It becomes reactive. It becomes haphazard. And it is not reflective of the strategic goals and where we are intending. So let's look at, is that clear about the defining of goals and the work plans? Is there any question that we can attend to? Milka Njoroge has said, for example, each out of 100, in Q1, actual 60 average, that is actual performance times a quarter of that is a quarter of the period. Then you do the same for the quarter 4, which is the 75%. Of course, you can also, you're able to see the charts. I think that is a response to Milka Akinyi from Milka Njoroge. She has actually responded to you and how they're working on it. Of course, she has given a disclaimer that I must clarify that I have found it very subjective. So probably they have done it, but it is not working so well for them. So we'll also have a discussion by the time we close this. Any other question, comments? What happens to your mic? I'm not seeing people unmuting, or is it that clear? Let me hear comments just to rally us on whether they
it's
are on
clear.
the right track.
It's clear. That's what I've written in
it is very clear.
Chart.
That's okay. So let's proceed.
Failure to plan, and that after hiring the best candidate, you just assume that it will all go well.
So actually, I'm happy that we are able to identify some of the challenges, or where our performance appraisal, whether you're using the balance scorecard or what tool you're using, where we all begin to fail. Recruitment, onboarding, training, then failure to plan. But then you want this tool that was made by this consultant who is high flying to work for you. It is a process. Performance appraisal is a journey. It's a process, and you're going to look at how the process flows. So if you miss on one process, then you'll have a lot of challenges. And there is no way a tool can make it work. It is how we do it. When we do it, and how effective we are in terms of doing our all HR functions. What I normally say about HR people assume it is very easy and can be done by everybody in the organization. But HR, it is very strategic. And the other aspect that you'll note in HR, all the HR functions are joined at the hip and they are intertwined. And how you do one function influences and has an impact on the other. So it's a whole system that you miss out on one function, it hits you on the other one, and you keep on struggling. So we should not be, we should avoid being what do you call it? Operating in clusters on silos, that a person who is doing training is only looking at the training budget and how he can use that and the number of training hours. Yet the person who is dealing with actually the performance management of the organization, they are not in sync. Like the left is not seeing what the right is doing. If you are not able to do it in a flow of a system, then you'll have a lot of challenges. Of course, in big organization, does the one function feed into the other? Recruitment should feed in the onboarding, on the training, on the performance, on the job analysis, the job evaluation, including the disciplinary, the promotions, the reward, the recognition, the motivation. Whether you're doing the staff satisfaction surveys or what, is it talking to all those aspects? So that is how HR operate. And for you to be strategic, you should be able to connect all those HR and also feel and be at the heart of the business of the organization. Back to the strategic plan, the purpose we exist. So that at times I normally see we go to interview, you ask a HR manager about their strategic plan and how they come up with strategic. They cannot say that. And they say it's done by our strategic, it's done by our finance. That we are so specialized and locked in our field, like we don't know how the organization operates. We need to be good business partners, that we understand right from the strategic plan. And what I encourage people, even when you're doing the strategic planning, one of the main focus, it should be that the HR is felt even in the strategic plan. If you go back and review your strategic plan, how many have ensured that human capital is one of the pillars of that organization? There is no organization that can operate, however the systems and the finance you have, without the human capital, soft skills, which is what we drive as HR. So for you to be able to sit at the table, you should be able to ensure that human capital is a strategic pillar. Mostly we'll only have 4 or 5 pillars in the organization. Ensure the human capital is there. Because all the other strategies and the plans that you'll have, without the heart of the HR as that human capital pillar, that drives that as they're coming up with their targets of the finance, the budget, it is all revolving, what can HR do? How can HR be a facilitator? How can HR be an enabler? and then you bring it down to the department. You should be able to sit with the departments. I say actually performance management is something that you cannot over-delegate as a HR manager. Ensure that even as departments, however specialized they are, when they are setting their targets, are they SMART targets? Are they measurable? When they are doing those appraisals, are they measurable? Because you'll see some very funny targets that cannot even be quantified or measurable, and you leave now the employees at the mercies of the feelings of the of their supervisor, because it's how I feel about them. So you should be able to be in the entire loop and be in the department when they are doing their strategic plan. You should be the lead. Of course, we have the enterprise performance management that can be done by someone else, but right from the departments, once you come now to defining the SMART targets, ensure they are SMART, that at the end of the period, they are not struggling to measure against the established standards. That what is meant by what they need to achieve, it is very clear, so that we are able to remove all those biases. I think that's very clear, and I just wanted to emphasize that. So let's look at performance criteria. We are, I think, 1 hour into it. We are halfway actually. Let's look at defining performance criteria, and what is a criteria from a layman's. Let me hear from someone. What is a criteria? What is a performance criteria? Of course, we have defined the goals. The goal is what we want to achieve, where we want to go, which we said they must be SMART. So what is a performance criteria? Now we have our SMART goals. Why do you need to define performance criteria? And what is, in your layman's understanding, a performance criteria? So that we know what you're discussing. What is a performance criteria? Anyone who is able to unmute? Anyone? Is everybody multitasking? Someone has said performance criteria is the benchmark to be used. Thank you, Jane. A performance criteria is just that standard that you set, that if I do this, if I exert this kind of effort, how do you know I'm performing or not? So there must be a benchmark. It is a standard that you set that now after you perform, you can come back and evaluate against that benchmark or a standard that you have established. So this is where the setting of the targets comes. And we say we must have a way of measuring what we are doing at the end of the day, so that we can have an effective performance appraisal. So when you say performance criteria, we say performance criteria helps to translate the job requirement into levels of acceptable or unacceptable employee behavior. So when you've been able to define a performance criteria, then objectively you can say, when you're looking at this job requirement, this is what we can say it is the satisfactory, the acceptable level of performance. And then you can distinguish that from what we call unacceptable employee behavior. And when you look at this employee's behavior, we really want to anchor it on the performance. And when you talk about the performance, it is that function of the job. Of course, when you come to discipline and the administrative issues, there are other code of conduct. We can say it is not an acceptable behavior, but is it related to work? And when we come up with the interventions, which performance intervention should we take if it's behavior that is job related and performance related, or is it a code of conduct or integrity issues that may not reflect on the performance, but should be dealt with administratively in terms of the disciplinary? I'll give an example. Like, of course, there are staff misconduct and integrity issues that can occur within an employee that has to be handled with disciplinary. Of course, we also have this category of employees who are very good at their job. They are the superstars. They achieve and actually exceed their performance targets. But how they do it and the other attributes they have it is not reflective in the performance criteria. So we go through the disciplinary. And that is why we also recommend when you're coming up with performance criteria or a performance appraisal system, ensure that the appraisal system that you have can measure both the hard, which is the job objectives and the duties and the job technical bits, and also the employees' competencies. When you come to competencies, of course, majority of the organization will weigh the job-related technical and job objective criteria to score like 80% or 70%, depending on the organization. Then they come to the lower part, which measures the competencies. They give it a score of 20% or 30% if you're on 70 on the other side. And these competencies have both how the employee is living the values of the organization. So the integrity, the conduct, and the mission, vision, and the core values comes into play. Of course, there are those organizations that actually mirror their core values into the competencies. It also looks at the other behaviors. It looks at the employee's personality. It also looks at the employee skills, and it also looks at the traits of that employee, so that you have a holistic performance appraisal. Let me hope that's how our performance appraisal tools looks like, that they're able to test the hard of the job requirement, and also these other competencies. So we say when you're looking at the performance criteria, it is essential to define performance criteria for conducting a performance appraisal. And you cannot conduct a performance appraisal if you don't have the performance criteria, which is the standards and the benchmark that you are going to subject the actual to what is expected. So the performance appraisal criteria, we can call it, is the measures, the standard, the expected. So if you don't have an expectation as an organization or as supervisor or as a HR, then you cannot come and appraise people. You are appraising them against what? Then we say finally, hence performance criteria is an important determinant of performance. It is an important determinant of performance management system, and it's a critical determinant of performance appraisal effectiveness and also the success. So just to continue, we say performance criteria plays a critical role in the job analysis and performance appraisal linkage. What we mean by that, it bridges that gap because you are able to do the job analysis. For us who are in HR, we understand what is job analysis. Job analysis, it is the analysis of the job responsibility and duties. Let's not confuse it with the job evaluation. The job evaluation, it is actually evaluation of the relative worth of the job. And that is what brings about the salary structures and the compensation structures. That is job evaluation. You look at the job, you look at the competencies required, you look at the weight, how it links the decision, the matrix, the authority, all those factors that we look at to actually measure, of course, not the accurate, but the relative worth of the job compared to the other jobs. So job evaluation brings about the job grading structures and the salary structures. But when you look at the job analysis, you are looking at the job itself and what is required and what an employee is required to do. So it looks at the duties and the responsibility and the effort and the behavior that needs to go into it. So once you have that, then it links the performance appraisal because we use the JD and the targets to come up with the performance appraisal. So the performance criteria is the one that sets the measures and the standard in between, and it creates that linkage. It is also critical to define performance criteria as it is important to have standards by which to compare good behavior or the bad behavior. And we can say that you can see that predictors are what company looks for in an individual when they are going to hire him. Then criteria of the performance is actually the evidence of a good employee. Of course, when you go out to the market to recruit, we look at, these are some of the predictors of a good employee. When they have these attributes and the specs, they're likely to perform. But when we bring them on board, we orient them, we do the induction, we train them, the performance criteria or the measures that we put is actually what determines whether that employee was actually a good employee or not. So we can see, you can see now the concept I was bringing about the predictors when you're going to recruitment and the selection, and the criteria when it comes now to measuring the actual performance. Then we also say that it is important to note here that there is always a gap observed between the theoretical or what we call the ideal criteria versus the actual criteria. Because even when you're coming up with the performance criteria, it also depends with the person who is setting this. So of course, what we send, and that is why we keep on reviewing them, monitoring them, whether what we have established as the performance criteria and what is coming out, is it really measuring what we need to measure? Of course, when you keep on reviewing and training employees and taking the feedback, those are some of the feedbacks you get as HR, that what we are measuring is actually not a true reflection of what the performance is all about. Of course, that gap. So the conversations we hold at senior management level, and that is why I say for you to have an effective performance appraisal, sensitization, feedback, and discussions and conversations are very critical. At the senior management level, when we sit, as you're making the strategic plan, we are doing the departmental plan. That's why HR, you need to be there. And when you're coming to those departmental plan and the feedback and setting the guidelines, that is an ongoing conversation. And at least I say every 3 years, ensure you take all your senior management through performance management trainings. Don't assume they know, whether it's a refresher for the tool you use, how to use it efficiently, the errors and the challenges we're experiencing, discuss them. Try to close these gaps of the theoretical or the perceived performance criteria and the actual criteria of what is coming out from the performance appraisal. When you come to your employee, stop assuming they know how to use the performance management tool. They understand the whole business of performance appraisal. They understand the importance and why they are critical. Have conversation. All the employees, that's the role of HR. If you're unable to do this, you can always hire a consultant who can train them. Whether it's a 1 day, 2 days training, you have that conversation. Of course, when they hear it from an outsider, probably it may resonate or it may be well accepted than when you do it yourself. So those are things that you do so that you are able to close those gaps. You can see what Milka is saying, we have this, but it's not working. Probably what you have not done, have you sit at that round table among the management for people to bring out the challenges? Maybe the challenges you're experiencing, Milka, you'll find half of the other senior managers are experiencing the same. It's only that they don't have a forum that you can come together, discuss, air the challenges, and propose improvements and the way to go round about it. Because there's no type of fixed performance appraisal tools you have. It is supposed to be improved gradually as per the needs of the organization where it works. Whether it was being given by a consultant, you should be able to tweak it to meeting the needs and measuring what you are looking at. So that's all about performance criteria. Probably from there, we can explain the steps in performance appraisal. And then we'll also look at who should be able to be appraising. And then we are going to look at a few methods. Then we can call it a day for the first day. So on a very high level, let me hear the steps we have or the processes in performance appraisal. Call it 4 or 5, depending with I want to hear what is the first step you should do in any performance appraisal. This is something we have discussed. Let's hear. What do you think? If someone is able to tell us, this is how we have a 5-step process or a 4 or a 3, this is how we do it. Then we can be able to understand as we discuss this. Milka is saying, no, we haven't. I'm learning where the challenges are coming from. Thank you. So it's not about the tool. You can have a very simple tool, but then it works for you. Then there's also a comment that performance criteria must be known by both parties. Actually, importance, it's not being known. When you talked about communication, they must be mutually agreed and jointly. And this is why we insist the individual performance plan, you don't have to sweat over it, that you have to have a different template called individual performance plan for an individual. Actually, me, what I use, the same tool that I'll use for appraisal, the same tool, I'll ensure there is what we call the targets. Those are the measurements, the standards that I'm going to evaluate you at the end of the period. I'll use the same template and also maybe feed in all the targets and the narrative that you need to, and I ensure there's a space for both of you to sign. In fact, what I normally do is just to cut the lower side of the signing that I agree with the appraisal and just put the signing that these are the targets. I just rename it individual work plan. Then for 2, it must be signed and discussed by the employee and the supervisor. That's where the discussion starts. It is not just, because when you say it must be known by each, what if I sit as a senior manager, do my performance appraisal, your performance targets, and send you and say, just sign below the lines. Or I just send it in one email for the department. Please note our performance criteria. And then I keep quiet. It has to be discussed on one-on-one, whether it's a group of employees you have who are doing the same role. Let's say in a banking, if you're talking about the tellers, they have the same transactions to be done in a day, the error rate, all that is the same. Have a discussion with that group of employees. Take them through. Discuss the targets. This is what I expect, that when you say you have brought an account, it must be closed, it must be funded. It must be well understood. After all that, it must be jointly signed by both parties, the employee and the supervisor. They must sign and it is filed. And I always insist, let it be filed with HR, because that is the only tool or document you can use if there is a performance appraisal grievance. And the one of the major or the most recurrent performance appraisal grievance is we never agreed on the targets. I was never notified. I was not aware. So the first thing when I have a performance appraisal grievance is I ask employee, please, or whoever has come, brought it to the HR, let me have your performance, your individual performance plan for this period. Did you sit and agree? Let me see what you discussed and agreed with your supervisor. Then I'll ask for the appraisal. And I'll ensure that the individual work plans mirrors what they are being appraised on, that we are not introducing new requirements or new standards when it comes to appraisal. It is what was agreed at the advance, then we mirror the two and we evaluate. Then, once we evaluate that, you can see the main bond of contention. For me, I always like the performance appraisal tool that gives the employee the opportunity for self-appraisal. That we have the targets, they are very clear. Of course, the employees have the responsibility to keep the records of how they are performing and to track. So they keep their own record. And those are the things you actually train them in those sensitization. Then I'll see, once the employee has appraised themselves, you'll find like where there are contentions, probably the employees has called themselves a 5, and the supervisor thinks the employee should get a 1. So that big variance, you can see it's a bond of contention, it's a point of contention. So you can go with the elimination method. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you even handling performance-related grievances if you don't have where you're starting from. Achiro say, yes, we have KPI set for departments and the same is put in their JD. This is signed by both the line manager and the employee and use it during appraisal. Is this the right way to do the performance objective? I don't see how you can put KPIs in JD. You know, when you onboard an employee, the first thing, we have the job advert that goes on, that I see, it attracts me to the organization and I make an application. That is the first line when you're doing the job analysis, you come up with the JD. After you have signed the JD, that is actually just a confirmation that the employee knows what is expected of them and the organization has spoken their expectation about this employee. That is the first level. From the JD is where you take the job responsibility and what they're supposed to deliver, what we call the functional, the duties. The KPIs are done in what we call the individual work plan, not in the JD. So JD is first separate, the immediate you give on day one. But once the department has come up with from the strategic plan, I said we have the organizational plan, or what we call the enterprise plan. Of course, a strategic plan is for 3 years or 5 years. So what happens? You pull what is supposed to be done in year 1, 2, 3. So in every subsequent year, you come up with all those things in an operational plan for the entire organization. And it has a column for who is responsible, if it's HR, if it's operation, whichever department. It is against that the department pulls, like whatever else is, all that is in the human capital pillar, I pull as the head of HR. And then I come up with my plan. Then you sit as a department and discuss what other things apart from what is in the strategy should we plan. So you have the operational plan or the departmental plan. So once you pick the departmental plan, which speaks to the operational plans for 1 year, it is against that departmental plan that has KPIs that measures the effectiveness of the department. It is the department that is being evaluated and reviewed. Then that is the one you cascade among all your employees in your department. Of course, I'll have the KPIs for the HR department. Of course, being the leader of the HR department, I'm fully accountable in how I delegate. So I'm going to have a review for the department. How is HR as a department performing? But when it comes to performance appraisal, I, Rhoda, as the HR director or the head of HR, I should be able to come up with my own individual, with my name on it and my supervisor on it as my individual owned work plan. That is what we call an individual work plan. In that individual work plan, that is where you set now the KPIs. KPIs ensure they are smart, they are measurable, they have timeline, they have all that. So that is what Rhoda will carry for the entire department and as me, as a HR. From there is where now you look at the specific JD of the people you have, whether they are HR managers, you have senior HR officer, principal HR officer, and you give them their individual KPIs, all individual targets or individual work plan. If you're talking about the training, of course, I'll carry the entire training, but who is supposed to compile the training, who is supposed to conduct the training needs assessment? I might allocate it to one person. Who is supposed to do the training plan? Of course, I'll ensure all the budgets. So you break it by what time? It must be measurable. What are the standards and the criteria that will show me that when I assign this to Milka, what is it that will show me that she has performed or she has not performed? That is what we call the individual work plan. That one we sign at the beginning of the period. And when you come to the quarterly, the half year and the annual appraisal, it is that I'll base the appraisal on. So that Rhoda, as the head of HR, does not wake up one morning and now I feel the way Milka has been behaving, I think I should have appraised her on this. It is not how I feel. Then it's going to be subjective. It is what we agreed right from the beginning that when I come to appraise you, it is on that basis. Now we are comparing. This is the plan we had. This is what we agreed. This is the actual. So when you're doing the self-appraisal, you are telling me when I went to the river or when I went to the lake, these are the fish that I've brought home. And you can count them, that you brought 1, 2, 3. You brought these. You have even agreed what kind of fish are you bringing, whether it's omena or whether it's tilapia. So that is what we said, clear up the KPIs and the targets, whatever you call them. You can call them KPIs at the organizational level, but the individual plan, it is the same structure, and you assign it to an individual. So when you come to appraisal, you are mirroring the two. We go to point 1, you are supposed to do that. Actual, you have appraised this, you have proof, you have record this, we agree or we disagree because I have maybe a different report on that. And the criteria that you are measuring yourself, that you went and recruited, of course, an account was opened, but it has not been funded. And it was not funded at that month. So that's how we do it. Is it clear, Achiro? That is the right way to set the individual work plan, the performance. Of course, when you talk about the objectives, they are at that higher level, but you must come up with specific targets for that. That is how it will work. That's how I would respond to that. And that's okay. It is okay. It's well understood?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you miss any of those points, then your appraisal system will not work. Let's look at the steps. I had asked that question before that question came. Someone to give us the step, whether there are 2 processes, 3, 4, whatever you think. Anyone, quickly. We learn by sharing. We learn by responding. That is how we are able to reflect, whether you're doing it right or not. What are the processes? Or do we just come at the end of the year, we chamois the form, we do the appraisal, we file, we do a report to the HR committee. That could be your process. It's happening in a lot of organizations.
I can take you through what we do.
Yes.
So once we have, like I had said, we have a job description, and then on the job description, we have key performance indicators that are placed. So that is what is communicated to the employees, that this is the job description, we take them through. Then the line manager capture on the key performance indicators, what they're supposed to deliver. So once they're communicated to on those deliverables, after 3 months, so they sit with the line manager and review if whether they are able to deliver on the aspects that they have been given. Then after that, we like a quarterly setup where we have our head of business, who's the director with the line managers and the HR, to review the employee together with the line manager on what they had said they're going to do in terms of departmental and in terms of appraisal. What now we do, like the performance appraisal for us. That's it.
That is very good. That is very good process they have, and you can see the aspects. Of course, she's talked about the planning. There is also the monitoring and the checking whether it is being done. What else have you had? There is the planning. Actually, she started from the JD. So when you're looking at the job description, what is the requirement? Setting the objective. That is the planning phase. Then they'll go and evaluate that whatever we have planned, now we come back and evaluate whether the actual and the expected, whether there is a gap. And then they have those discussions. Any other? Just a minute, I stop sharing. I need to adjust my machine just slightly. Any other comment? I think that answers it. We can just proceed and see what we have. It is just a process that I've played, and I think what we've been explaining, I think I've been doing a lot of explaining what is expected, and I'll just want to put it in one slide. So when you look at the steps in appraisal, which you can take a screenshot of that, of course, we'll share the notes with you. It starts from setting and communicating the performance standards. You must set, you must define. When you look at it, we start by defining the goals and the work effort. So the goals are the performance objectives, which are defined right from the strategic plan. We have talked about the operational plan, the departmental plans, and we have talked about the individual work plan. Setting is when you come up, you must clearly define the goals and the objectives, and also the measurement criteria, or what we are calling the performance standards, so that it is known. So you set and you communicate. How do you communicate? You communicate through discussions and the sign-off, so that by the time you embark on the journey, we are on the same page, and we understand when I say I need 10 blue pens, you know what the blue pens look like and what I expect. Because there are many types of blue pen. There are those that are specific. I should be able to count them, that these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. And you must bring them to this standard that are of good quality, they are writing, and they must be brought by this date, so that I'll be able to know by the end of the day whether it has responded to that performance standard or not. And if I perform that, I should be able to clearly see with confidence, even without an appraiser, whether I have performed or not. I could have gone to the marketplace, but the stock was over. I didn't get. I only got black pens. So by the time you come, when you're discussing, you should be able to know that I was asked for blue, but maybe I brought black. So you can appraise, because I'll be asking you, how many blue pen of the big make did you bring? You can answer that question to the affirmative or not. We have agreed that by 30th June, you should have recruited this number of employees through competitive sourcing externally. So you have come up with the performance initiative. Of course, the criteria is there. The initiative is how, whether the recruitment or filling of those positions, it should be very clear whether we are going to source from the outside market or we are going to do internal promotions. So even how you are going to do it, it must be very clear. And the timelines must be very clear. And the measurement, I should be able to know which are these vacant positions that you are to fill. Were they just any positions or they were identified positions? When you come to training needs, what are the needs that you have filled? What are the needs that have been actually identified? And what % of those needs have you closed to enable the performance improvement? Or is it just training that I sent people for training, whether they are community-based training, whether they are irrelevant training, or what I'm interested is the number of training hours. It must be relevant, it must be responsive, it must be measurable. So when you're setting and communicating performance goal, we plan the performance. So we must identify and communicate performance goal, and we must be able to clearly establish the performance criteria. Then the second step that we have in the process is now, once we have set, we have signed them, packed them nicely, 30th of January. When we come to 31st of March, maybe when we are doing the first performance appraisal quarterly, for those who do the first quarterly, or when you come to the end of the year, we have to look at what we call measuring the standards. Yes, we have the yardstick, we have the measurements, we have the benchmark. Now we measure to determine, and with the measurements, we must determine what is the appraisal period and the method. That this is the tool that we'll use, and we'll use it by end of the first quarter, by the end of the half year, or at the end. So the appraisal periods must be very well known in advance. It should not be a surprise that we just wake up one day and we say, now we want to appraise you. Then the responsibility of the appraiser should be very clear. Of course, the responsibility of the appraisal, it is actually to gauge the movements, that these are the standards, what is the actual. Then, why are we doing the appraisal? Because we want to identify any gaps that exist, and we want to develop the employee so that we are able to perform at their optimal level. We want to look for those potentials so that we can close. Of course, when you're doing the measurements of these standards, we anticipate and consider problems in performance appraisal. That have we equipped our employee? Have we provided them with the resources that are required to be able to actually achieve those performance? I'll give an example. We recruit a driver and we expect them to do this and this, but there is no vehicle to be driven. We have not even acquired. So if there, or maybe the vehicle has been involved in an accident. So maybe by the time we get the funds to repair, he may not even be carrying out those duties. So we must be able to anticipate and consider any limitations to the performance or any problems that may arise and see how to deal with them. Then we also must ensure that the performance appraisal system is operating effectively right from the planning. After you're done with the measuring and the benchmarking of the standards, we compare the standards. So we examine what work has been performed. These are the standards we set. This is what we expected. Now come and we have a discussion. What is it that you have delivered? What has been performed? And of course, at this point, we are looking at performing them, supporting the employee through coaching, training, and any interventions, and probably even job shadowing, assigning them to someone who is more skilled, who is more experienced, who is more competent, so that they can learn on the job. And when you come to support and the training, our trainings should be responsive to the performance period. Because if a department or an employee require a particular training for them to achieve this, let's say it's sales, and they don't know how to sell, these are new recruits. You need them to subject them to a thorough sales training course for them to go out to the field and be able to sell. You need to train them on your products. If you fail to give them this support and they hit the ground, they are not likely to perform. Or you cannot come as the HR or the manager at the middle of the performance period, which is June, July, or December, depending with where you're coming from. It is the time now you want to take them for training because you can see the appraisal is around the corner. Or 1 month to the performance appraisal, it is when you have subjected them to the training. So the performance period and their effort will not have been reflective of what they ought to do. So the training must be conducted at the right time and to the right parties for them to be able to perform. So that is the kind of management support we are looking at. Then after we have compared, of course, now I'm mirroring, comparing an apple for an apple, then we must discuss the results. Why are we having variances? What is it that you did so well? What are the efforts that we can learn from you that you applied, that you are able to achieve and even exceed these targets even before the time? So you learn the good, positive, and even the others can actually borrow from that. Then I'm also seeing you are lagging behind on this and this. So what are the challenges? What happened? Is it the market that changed? Are there parameters that changed? What support can we give you? What support do you need for management to be able to do? Or what can we do? Or what can you change? Or what have you discovered and learned that you can do differently from the things that you have achieved, and that you are to apply that, you'll be able to perform. Those are the kind of performance discussion you hold with your employee. And that is why you have to have one-on-one discussion. Of course, in this era of technology, if you're not able, because probably you are spread across the country, have Zoom, have Google Meet, any platform you can meet with the employee, ensure you have those discussions. Pick the challenges, pick the feedback, support, resolve what you can resolve, develop where the employee needs, so that you are focusing on the improvement of that. After you discuss, then you take the corrective standards or the measures. What have you agreed? What is going to change? And when you're doing that, we are conducting the appraisal interview, and you discuss now the goals for the next. Probably if this is at the end of the year, you also now discuss the performance goal for the next period, and then the cycle repeats itself. Is that clear? So if you fail again to conduct these interviews, these discussions, because most of us in HR, I just see papers flying. We write an email that we must have all the performance appraisals by Friday, by 2 p.m. or before the close of business. So the papers start flying from this department in files. Then we ask HR, you have even assigned this job to a HR assistant, and they are all filed. And in good box files, we display. And we have a checklist. Rhoda has picked, John has brought, Milka has submitted. All we have to do is to tick, 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 and say 100% or 98% of the staff have submitted their performance. And for us, it is tick, performed. But do we ensure when these forms come to us that we actually see these things have been followed? Do we follow through every step. That is why I said performance management is an activity the head of HR or HR should not over-delegate, because they should be involved and should be at every stage. Of course, there are times like even when you're comparing the standards, we have grievances right there. You are comparing against what we didn't agree. Or these standards, these targets are not realistic, they are not attainable, those are the grievances. When you are discussing, the employee feel that the supervisor is biased, they don't get well along, he's giving him more the assignment when the others are given less workload, and then we need not even discuss. We were just, maybe there are even times that I've seen that no targets were set, the appraisal form is sent by HR, it is filled, employee does the appraisal, take it to their boss, leave it on the table, the supervisor comes, score according to his wishes and how he feels, sign it off, put it in a confidential envelope, send it to HR, and that is done. You cannot have an effective appraisal when you conduct it that way. Any experiences we can share? Can we resonate with those? Or those are imaginary institutions Rhoda is talking about? Are they imaginary or they do happen? Have you experienced that in one of the workplaces you previously worked? Not the one that you work, because probably where you are, you don't do such. Anyone? Let me see your comments. Or are they far-fetched? Are they far-fetched? Let's engage. No, they are not far-fetched. That is actually what has happened. Njoroge is saying you're so right, that happens. No, they are not far-fetched. So those are the reality. That's why you can see the areas where we fail. And I think we are just here to refresh our mind. So who should be appraising employees? And where my slides are lagging, who do you think should be appraising employees? Let me hear from you. Is it the employees themselves? Is it the line manager and why? Is it the CEO? In fact, someone last week asked me who should be appraising the PA to the CEO, because they all fall in HR and admin. In the secretariat, is it the HR or is it the CEO? This is the PA to the CEO, who is an administrator or a secretary under the HR and admin department. So who should be appraising employees? Response, the line manager. Why? Because this is the person who spends a lot of time with the employee. This is the person who will give the employee the JD. This is the person who will discuss the performance targets and the standard. This is the person who is always with the employee. Then we are saying HR only assists in the process. This is the person who is an expert in the specific area of the department. Should your clients and the customers be appraising employee directly or indirectly? Should the peers be evaluating the employees directly or indirectly, and why? How many of us have heard about 360-degree appraisal? Degree appraisal, who does it? We are going to look at it. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say and to bring about is generally the supervisor, as you have correctly pointed, is the best person to observe and evaluate the subordinate's performance. And he is also responsible for the performance of that employees, because they are pulling towards the organizational goal, the departmental goal, and all that. However, we say relying 100% fully or solely on the supervisor's rating is not always advisable, because this is due to the fact that the immediate supervisor may be biased or against the employee. Have we had scenarios where the employee is not seeing eye to eye with their supervisor, and they have so much differences and the performance appraisal of this employee. And in an organization where the performance appraisal is not so effectively working, we are jumping some of the processes. The environment is top down. An employee is just to be seen but not to be heard. And now we are subjecting this employee to the mercies of that supervisor. What is likely to happen to that employee? Demoralized. So we are saying it is essential that the appraisal may be done by some other persons or people, or have interventions like the way we have said in HR. Those are just comments I'm seeing. So we may involve, and we can look at some of the people we can involve in when it comes to performance appraisal. And some maybe of the few suitable people that you can rely on could be the immediate supervisor we have talked about, the peers, of course, the subordinates, and also the aspect of self-rating, where we give an employee the opportunity to rate themselves. This is the self-appraisal system, where you have the agreed targets and the standards measures which are very clearly defined. Then you give them, then you have a column where the employee is given an opportunity for self-rating. They keep their documentation, they have their records, and they rate themselves. Then beside that column is what we have, or we call agreed rating. And mostly it is after we are having the discussion, we'll be discussing, you think you have performed at 5. These are the guidelines and the threshold that we agreed and the criteria. But for me as the supervisor, I think you didn't perform at 5, you performed at 3. So you discuss the reasons why I feel and you feel, and then we can adjust that and agree. Yenyewe, there you have a point, let's make it a 4, because there is a part of completion, there is part of the quality that you didn't meet. So you change that and you say the agreed rating is 4. So there you're moving item by item in an interview and you're discussing. And when you have such a scenario where the supervisor is hostile and is biased towards an employee, even you as HR or the ones, maybe you have rating committees again, you can actually follow the track and see what is the bone of contention, what is contentious about the whole this appraisal. Is it the employee is on the wrong, or is it the supervisor? Because you can clearly see if actually one had rated themselves 5, now you have agreed a 4, you'll say, there we agreed. Or when you see someone has rated a 5 and the supervisor has brought down, or you didn't agree to a 1, you can see that's such a big variance. And then you bring out what are the areas, why do you think as an employee, what are the records and the documents you have that shows you should have scored at this? And you can come back and specify and say, this is what the employees has as approved. Why do you feel they should score? And these are the guidelines. So you are able to amicably solve that issues. So you are able to even see the errors and the biasness of either of the parties. That is why the 360-degree feedback at times work. 360-degree feedback, it is not used alone as an isolation. And mostly, this is also subjected to the line managers and people in leadership position, because they are evaluated by their peers, the subordinates, the immediate supervisor, all that, and the team. So you can see that 360-degree. So this can be combined with the normal balance scorecard or the performance appraisal that you have. All could be used where there are doubts, or it can be used where there, but it is a good tool that you can employ in your organization. And that's all what I could talk about, who should do the appraisal. And that is why you could see some organization incorporating the performance appraisal, the 360-degree, and we are going to look at it more in details later. So what are some of the performance management methods that you use? I've seen someone writing, they use management by objective. So the various methods we can discuss, maybe this is where I'll say I'll introduce like maybe 3 of them or 4. Then tomorrow we can start with the rest. I can see it's 11:22. What time do you want us to stop? So that I know we started in late. We can go up probably to 12. Then we can cover what we are supposed to cover today. Then tomorrow we start at 8:30 and we finished at 11. Let me hear from you so that I'm not left in class alone. What time we should at 12? So we build consensus at 12. We just try to cover the 1 hour, the 30 minutes we lost, and then we can just stop at where. So the various methods we have what we call the critical incidences. I'm just seeing your comments coming in 12. That's in agreement. Several people have said 12, so I go with it. So some of the performance appraisal methods that we can use, and the ones that we are going to discuss in this forum. Of course, don't be confused by the big name. I want you to look at the features of those performance methods, and probably what I'm calling the bars or behavioral anchored rating scales is basically what we use when we have those ratings of 1 to 5 with their own guidelines, that when you are at 5, you are excellent and you have these guidelines. When you're at 1, you are below the expected standards. It could just mean basically that. So you'll not have a performance appraisal tool that we call behavioral anchored rating scale appraisal tool. We just want you to see a combination, the features, what are the benefits, what are the advantages, and see what we can borrow. Some you can even combine. You can borrow the benefits and this and come up with a good tool like management, and they're interrelated, and we'll see. So for today, I'm going to talk about the critical incidents, the behavioral anchored rating scales, which is preferred for majority, then graphical ratings, just as the graph talks about, then the management by objectives, then the rest of them will cover them tomorrow. So the ones that we have is critical incidents, the behavioral anchored rating, we have graphical rating scale, management by objective. Of course, we have SE appraisal. I got an interesting feedback from one of my delegates last week who told me in the performance appraisal tool they have, it is just an SE. They don't even have scores that you can be rated 1, 2, or there are no numbers to be attached, whether you are a 1. They just write an essay and it is filed for someone to just read, and we'll see the benefits and the disadvantage of that. That's from an NGO. Then we have what we call the multi-rater assessment, of what I've talked about is the 360-degree feedback, which is getting feedback from various people. Then we have the first choice rating and the checklist, where you just come up with the checklist, like those ones we see for the medical assessment. And then beside that, we also what we have called the ranking method. And the ranking methods, we look at 3 of them. We have the force distribution, paired comparison rating, and also the alternative ranking, which is basically just on ranking from a scale of 1 to 10, which is the highest, and you give. So let's go to the critical incidences. So for the critical incidences, as the name suggests, it is a performance appraisal method where the supervisor actually keep a record of what they consider to be critical incidences or critical behavior or traits of an employee whenever they occur. So like if Rhoda comes in late today, I'll have somewhere, I'll keep a record of that critical, that Rhoda came in late today and the client had to wait for her, or the client got annoyed and left. So the supervisor will keep a record of that critical incident. Another one, Rhoda did her presentation in the boardroom so well, she wowed the management, and we got a good departmental buy-in for our report that led to the approval of that HR policy because of the work that she put on. So again, they could keep a record of that. What is our opinion about that kind of a method? I don't know where my slides are not moving. What do you think would be the weaknesses? Just to look at them, we say in this method, the supervisor focuses on specific or critical behaviors that help him to differentiate effective from ineffective performance. So here they just focus on critical behaviors. And my question is, when you focus on critical behavior, would you be focusing on behaviors that are related to the functions or the duties? Or you're likely to be biased that you look at behaviors that are not applicable to that job. And when you say critical behavior, it is critical to who? It might be critical to one manager and not the other, and can be prone to biases. So here we are saying, just for an explanation, that the rater has to keep a written record of incidences involving job behaviors that illustrate both positive and negative employees' behavior. And then he uses these records of incidences as a basis for evaluating the employee's performance. So I'll be telling you, you talked rudely 5 times in this year. You did your reports on time 5 times or 3 times in this year. You came late on 4 occasions on this year. So a few examples of critical incidences may be when an employee refused to accept instructions, maybe insubordination, refused to help fellow employees, his performance of difficult tasks. So that is put in records about that incident. I don't know why I'm experiencing a lag with my slides. So we say some of the advantages of this critical behavior method of appraising. It is that a major advantage of this method is that it helps to ensure that the supervisor thinks about the subordinate's appraisal and performance all the time during the year, because you have to keep a book of record about that employee. However, it has 3 main disadvantages. One of them is it requires the rater to jot down incidences regularly, which can be burdensome and time-consuming. And it's also difficult to clearly determine a critical incident, and hence it may be interpreted in different ways by different people. Then it may lead to employees' perception of the manager that the manager is keeping a black book or a green book on him. So that feeling, and it might lead to demotivation because the manager is keeping a book on an employee, and you can even find that the employee will look for all the ways that he will not be caught. Then the other method we can look at is graphic rating method scale. And the graphic rating method, as the name suggests, it is a method that uses a scale. Of course, graphs is all about a scale that lists a number of traits. Here you look at what they're focusing on, traits of an employee. And when you ask what is a trait, traits are those inherent characters that distinguish one employee from another. It is what makes up a person, the personality. So this graphic rating actually scale, it lists a number of traits. We look at some of them of a job and a range of performance for each that is used to identify the score that best describe an employee's level of performance for each of the traits. So like how productive is Rhoda? Probably I'll pick, if she works and comes early, she's productive. So I give a score between a scale of 1 to 10. I would rate her as 7 in terms of productivity. In terms of maybe the cooperation, that's how I cooperate with the other, and the coordination. She's not a team person, so I'll score her a 3. So the rating scales include both the numerical rate and also the description of that person. But here we are focusing on the number of traits that are required for that job. So some of these examples that an employee may be rated in are factors such as the productivity. Then you give a rating. In a scale of 1 to 10, what is the rating you will give? The quality of work, how is generally her quality of work? Of course, this is dependent with your traits, you score. How dependable is Rhoda? Then you rate. What is her level of job knowledge? She's quite knowledgeable, so you give a 5. Then how cooperative is she? Then you give a scale, and you can see maybe the scale on numerical, you'll have a scale of 1, and then you can give, that's a 5 here, I give a 7. Then you come and draw a graphical scale. Some of the advantages are, it is very easy to sit. I can even just sit under a tree and say, in a scale of, this is my scale. So it's easy to use. It is very easy to complete. And I'm sure senior managers who gives you trouble in terms of appraisal and submitting the appraisals of the employee would have a field day. Then it is relatively very low cost because you don't have to take a lot of parameters, just a few, maybe 5 to 6 traits. Then some of the disadvantages is that it focuses more on the person instead of the performance. So you are looking at the personal attributes. I may not like you. some things, or maybe my traits, I may not be in control of them. So the rater may not be able to interpret written description of the same manner due to their differences in the background. Maybe there is someone that we can rhyme very well with. We have the same personality. They work the same way I work. So they're likely, that kind of a rater are likely to rate those employees better than the ones who are separately or who are different from them in terms of their personal traits, because of their differences in their background, their differences in their experiences, and also their personality traits. Then categories chosen for rating may have little or no relationship to the job performance because they are based on personal traits. That's what we call the graphical rating scale. Behavioral anchored rating scales, they're a bit complicated, but is one of the best methods to do. But I'll take you slowly through the slides, and I want you to keenly look at what I've underlined and also put in bold, because that's what describes it. We call it, in short, the BARS. BARS means behaviorally anchored rating scales. So what this method tries to do, it combines the critical incidences, it combines the graphic, so it looks at both the quantitative, the narrative, and it has those measures, and it brings together both. That is why you can see the measurable SMART objectives in the job-related responsibility. Now, when you come to traits and behaviors, you bring them in the competences, and then you're trying to marry the two. So you can have behavioral anchored rating skills. I can tell you, like in one of the organization I was working for Standard Chartered, how we used to do this in terms of the job-related, what you call the KPIs. We used to have the numerical in a scale of 1 to 5. There, 1 used to be the highest. But then when you came to the behavioral, the competences, we used to have the letters of A up to E. So you could find, if I'm a star performance in the job-related KPIs, I could score 1, which then was the highest. We used to have the reverse. But if maybe how I'm achieving those job objective is not through the right ways, I'm not living the values, and used to take the values and keep them as our competencies. So I may be achieving my targets and exceeding, but how I'm achieving my sales targets or financial targets, because it's a financial industry, is by coercing the customers, working on my colleagues' heads. I have no regard for the values, so I'm not reflective of what the organization stands for. So there you could score the lowest, which was an E. So you could have an employee scoring 1 star performer in terms of the work-related, but in terms of the social competencies and the traits, I'm doing very poorly, you get an E. Such an employee with an A, E, who on the extreme could not even qualify for a salary increment and could not qualify for bonus, because we used to have bonuses, because they were looking for holistic, balanced employee. So you could see an average performer who gets a 3, performing on the average, they meet their targets, and they're not doing so badly, they're leaving the value, that's a 3C, could get a bonus, when someone who is a star performer at 1, but not living the values and have their behaviors all wrong, being denied an increment and a bonus. So everybody would aspire to have both of them. So this is what behavioral anchored rating scale tries to merge. So, and we can read and say behavioral anchored rating scales, that's what we call the BARS, is an appraisal method that combines the benefit of narrative critical incidences, that is normally qualitative and narrative, and quantitative rating. This is done by using quantifiable scales when you come to KPIs with specific narrative examples of good and bad performance or poor performance. So they'll say for you to score an A, they give an entire guideline that when you exhibit these behaviors, then you are a good performer. Then when you get this, and with this kind of narrative description, it packs you at a poor performance. So you marry the two. In this method, the supervisor rates the employee according to items on numerical scale. BARS helps to overcome the errors in performance appraisal that occur when using the graphic rating scales that we say It just focuses on the employee's traits and the person. So BAS helps to determine an employee's level of performance based on whether or not certain specifically described job behaviors are present or not present. So they focus on functional behaviors. They are just specific behaviors that relates to your job and to your work. So it considers the job description and your function in that organization and the functional goals, not just you as a person. And so they focus on functional behavior demonstrated on the job rather than the performance outcome. It is assumed that these functional behaviors, which has been analyzed and aligned to the job objectives, will result to effective job performance. Then in terms of some of the few terms that have been associated with this are job dimensions, the scale values, and the anchors. So I'll describe to you what these anchors and what dimensions they are so that you can be able now to relate. So when you talk about the job dimension, it is like the performance job criteria of that job. It means the broad categories of duty. So you take someone's JD and you can put it like 5 major functions about the HR. Then you look at maybe the formulation of the policies and the strategy. Planning is core. Of course, planning carries the training plan, the manpower planning, the budgeting, all that. So you take the broad categories of duties and responsibility that make up a job that you're looking at. And each job is likely to have several job dimensions, and separate skills must be developed for each and probably give different weighting for each of them. Then when you talk about the scale values, this defines the specific categories of performance, how we are going to scale, like this is an excellent performer, this is a very good performance, this is good, this is average, this is poor. So those are the rating values that you allocate those values in terms of the numerics. Then when you talk about the anchors, you are saying these are specific written statement of actual behavior. How are you supposed to model? How you are supposed to behave? So the anchors are specific written statements, predetermined and written and agreed of the actual behavior that when exhibited on the job indicate a level of performance, whether at a higher scale or at a lower, or the opposite that of that particular anchor. So that is how it works. So just to continue, I don't know whether it's my internet. We are just going to look at maybe the 5 steps of how this is developed. If you follow, you'll just understand they are very clear. So the first step when you are dealing with behaviorally anchored rating scale, the first item is the job analysis. So you generate critical incidences. And what happens here is that the job analyst or the job experts specify effective and ineffective job-related behavior. In the critical, what is effective job behavior and what is ineffective? Or what is positive, what is not positive? That if you demonstrate this, that now it is a positive or it is an acceptable or effective behavior. After you have critically generated those incidences, so you have a list of predetermined incidences, not what you're waiting to observe. It is what is already predetermined. Now you develop what you call the performance dimension or performance criteria. And what you'll do here, you group the incidences into cluster. And then those are the performance criteria that you'll be using. From there, you reallocate the incidences into the same clusters. They retain some incidences that are assigned twice. So the one that is coming more frequently, they can be put in one basket because you want to have just few. Then the ones that keep on being repeated, they become more critical because they are coming out on several times. So that is maintained as one of the critical of that job. Then number 4, you scale the incidences arranged from the effective to the inefficient. So the effective ones, you give the higher scale and the score, and the ineffective one or the poor one, they go to the other extreme of the poor. And finally, now you develop a final instrument. These are maybe 6 or the 7 incidences of your job that are used as behavioral anchors for each performance dimension. And that is it, how you do. Just a lot of words, but you are determined what is critical for that job. So we are marrying the graphical and also the incidents. Let's look at some of the methods, the benefits. Before we go to the benefits, we can also look at how these are used. Sorry, my presentation is lagging for some reason. I hope you can hear me clearly. Hope it's not my internet that is misbehaving. Confirm you can hear me. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I think it's my internet that is misbehaving, yeah. So some of the 3 points that I want you to take on this method is that the raters should first read list of all anchored, or all anchors. Anchors, of course, we said they are the written statements of the performance criteria. So the raters should first read the list of the anchors on each scale to find the group of anchors that best describe the employee job behavior during the period being reviewed. So they are referring to those anchors that were pre-agreed and determined. So you are reading from that list, if they have exhibited this type of job behavior, is it a 1, a 2, a 3, what has, then you place the employee where they're supposed to be placed. Then the total evaluation combines the scale value checked for all the job dimensions we've talked about, whether they are 5, 6, or 7. Then the rater then selects and checks the scale value opposite the group of anchors. This process is followed for all the identified job dimensions of the job. And you'll find this when you come to performance guidelines. For those who have performance policies, the guidelines that we normally outline, especially when you look at the competencies, it is based on this. So some of the advantages, quite many, it is relatively more accurate method of measure because it combines the qualitative and the quantitative, and the job dimensions or criteria are pre-agreed and compared during the evaluation. And then it is a very clear defined, it has very clear defined standards. I've explained that. It helps in providing specific constructive feedback to employee, because you can show them, for you to move from ineffective to effective, this is how effectiveness look like. So you walk them through the scale and what they need to do and what they need to amend or work on. Then it is developed through active participation of the manager and the job holder. Then it has great chance of acceptance to both the manager and the incumbent are involved in its development. And you can see it's a continuous discussion that looks at the JD, brings the performance objective, the appraisal system, and their guidelines that guides or something which is pre-agreed. Some of the disadvantage, of course, it takes considerable time and commitment. It is a more complicated system if you look at it compared to the other incidences where you can sit under a tree and just stick there or just draw a scale and a graph. Then there are separate forms that have to be developed for different jobs because you are looking for specific job for any of that. So management by objective, of course, I saw someone talking about it. And that will be the last method I want to look at. It is not so difficult for those people who have used balance scorecard. Then we can call it a day. Then we'll pick the rest maybe from tomorrow at 8:30. So management by objective, as the name suggests, it is a method of appraisal that use the objective. And these are picked from the strategic objectives and the strategic goal of the organization. Then they are cascaded to departments. That's why we have come up with the KPIs and the objectives and the key result areas, and that is cascaded to the employee to have those performance objectives. So management by objective method involves setting specific measurable goals with each employee, then periodically reviewing the progress that has been made by this employee. And in this method, quantitative measures are very critical. It is about numbers, it is about ratios, it is about results. And some of the parameters or measures we use are such: sales. How much sales are you bringing? A lot of financial institution or private for-profit organization use management by objective because they want to measure everything in quantifiable measures and units, because that is the only way they can know whether they are serving their customers, whether they are in business. They look at the turnover, and for them, it's about the bottom line. It's about efficiencies in terms of the cutting the cost. So some of the measures they look at: sales, what are the profits, what are the turnovers, what are zero defects unit to reduce on operational cost and reworks produced, and these are aligned with the objectives. So MBOs, well, that's management by objective, evaluates how well an employee has accomplished, not just what they have accomplished, but how. It looks at what has been accomplished and how has it been accomplished. Solid good people. That was unforeseen. I've tried to connect with another gadget and hope now you can hear me. Can you hear me? Those who are in?
Yes.
Okay, so we are just at the tail end. Sorry for that. So you'll just allow me to finish. We were just concluding of management by objective. And the 6 steps that we look at this performance appraisal method. The first is to set the organizational goals. And I had explained that this you set from a strategic level, where you come up with a strategic objective, you have your strategic pillars, which are about 4, 5, not more than 6. Then you come up with your strategic objective on a very high level. Then you come and develop your departmental strategic objective, now like HR strategy with your own objectives. Then you cascade it up to from the departmental to the employee level. So the first step is to set up the organizational goals through the strategic plan. Then you set the departmental goal as number 2. Step 3, you discuss this departmental goal. And it is at this point of discussing the departmental goal that you as a HR leader, who is a strategic leader, you discuss with your employees. Your employees, you take them through the performance objective, strategic. You're able to break your strategic plan, which is a very huge document, into maybe a 5 2-page slides that your employee, right from the cleaner to the manager, they are able to understand the strategic direction of the organization. You tell them on a very high level as an institution, this is why we exist, and this is where we purpose to go in terms of the strategic direction. Tell them that the organization has come up with this strategic objective to maybe focus on business growth, issues of processes, issues of HR, issues of ICT. You take them at a very high level. You tell them the IT will pull on this side and bring this. The business people are expected to do this and pull on this. The operation in a language that is so simplified that you dissect the strategy. Then you come and tell us the department under the human capital pillar, or what we are expected as a department to deliver, it is in the strategic plan and we are expected to do 1, 2, 3. So as a department, we are going to pull together and do these activities. As the one in charge, I carry the department, but I can only achieve this through your combined efforts. So you are going to split all that departmental into individual. So they are seeing the roadmap, where you are coming from and why you are asking them to do what you are asking them to do. So you are able to distinguish. So this step 3, it is a very critical position at a line manager. Because as HR, of course, we are the facilitators, we are the enabler of the organization and performance, but we are also line managers of our departments. Again, our involvement in performance appraisal starts from here. When these departments are having those departmental meetings to set the targets and to cascade, because you're already in the strategic plan, you know the operational plan for the whole organization, you are able to follow through the document that is shared. The way the line manager is able to walk their people from the organizational to departmental to the individual, so that people can understand why are we asking them to behave the way they are supposed to, that we're asking them to behave. Why are we asking them and giving them stretching targets? Because if we fail as a department, the entire organization fails. If we fail as an individual, even your department will not achieve. With that common understanding, everybody will be ready to pull together and also support you in that. So you discuss the departmental goals. Then step 4, you define what we are calling the performance criteria and goals. What are the expected results? That when we sit here as a department, how would we know by the end of the day that we are performing and that we are delivering? So you define the expected results in terms of the KPIs, the targets that we say they must be SMART. They must be very specific, they must be measurable, they must be realistic, they must be attainable, and they must have a time aspect in terms of them. Then from there, you conduct the performance reviews and evaluations and measure the results. So whatever we agreed, then what is the actual? Then we measure and see with the yardsticks that we have established, are we there or are we there? Are we not there? And what initiatives do we do? Then we communicate and we give feedback to the employee, and the cycle starts all over again the way we had agreed. You're able to see my screen? You're able to see my screen? Maybe just to put it in that format. Then what are some of the advantages? Like we have looked at all the other three methods. The advantages of management by objective. One, we say some of the advantages of this method are as follows. It sets objectives that are quantifiable and measurable. And also it puts us at the heart of the strategic objective of the organization. And it ensures that everybody is pulling to the same direction towards the same strategic objectives. Then it includes the employee participation in the objective setting process, because you see the way you're walking them down from the strategy, planning, the objectives to the individual level. It also involves employee active participation in developing the action plan, and it provides an opportunity for manager and employee to discuss progress and modify objectives where they are necessary. Because you'll get a lot of ideas from your employee. They'll tell you, Madam, if we go this, probably you can achieve this in a much efficient and a faster way. Then some of the disadvantages we have is that it is time consuming, because you can see you have to take your time to break the objective from the strategic objective level, bring them all the way to the organization, to the departments, to you as the leader, putting yourselves in their shoe, to their individual, and you walk. But it takes time, but I think it pays. Then it may also result in a tug of war or to and fro discussions between managers themselves, especially when they go for strategic planning and they have that consolidation or consolidated operational plan. So you'll hear the departmental silos where the departments feel they are not performing because they don't feel supported by this other department. They don't feel that they feel like they were given very stretching targets, yet HR is not supporting them in terms of recruiting the right people at the right time, people with the right competences and the qualifications. So maybe your turnaround is, you'll hear like the sales department is complaining that the manufacturing or the production department is making them lag behind. Maybe the quality of their work, there are a lot of errors. So maybe the customers are complaining about the defects. There is also a return of a lot of their products. So there is a lot of blame game. So it may also result in a tug of war between the supervisor and also the employees themselves, that they feel you want us to do too much, but then we are not being supported. So this tug of war to and from the discussion before you come to an agreement between the manager and the employee for setting objectives and the action plan take quite a bit of time. And there is that back and forth. This is what the objective means. This is what we should do. So that consultation, we know where there's a lot of consultation also, it takes time, though the output is very good. So we're also saying that this method actually employs the MAT source feedback method that we talked about, which provide comprehensive perspective of the employee performance by utilizing feedback from the full cycle of people with whom the employee interact with. So we are talking about the clients, the managers, the reports, the peers, the other departments, and breaking those departmental silos, and the supervisors, the subordinate, and also the co-workers. So again, we are saying the managers, the peers, the customers, the suppliers, or the colleagues are asked to complete questionnaires on the, this is about the 360 that we can look at. Let's look at the 360. We had tentatively introduced it, but I think because of time, it's already 12 as I promised. Let's start on the 360-degree feedback tomorrow at 8:30. So maybe just to hear your reactions. I know some people have dropped off when I dropped off, but that is it for today. Unless there is any burning questions, let me see what is in the chat. Then we can agree to meet exactly It was just a confirmation that we are back online. So with that, I think I would want to stop at that point so that we pick from the third. That will be our fifth method. We have looked at critical incidences. We have looked at the graphical rating stance of the methods. We have looked at the bars and the management by objectives. So tomorrow morning, we'll start with the rest, which is the MATI rate at the 360. Then we'll look at the SE, the checklist, the first choice rating, the ranking methods, the three of them. Then we'll continue with the rest of the presentation. That is all from me for today. So unless there is any burning, which I'm not seeing any comments, I wish you a very good afternoon. And it was my pleasure to interact with you. So tomorrow we meet at 8:30 exactly. And I hope we all have now the right drink so that we continue with the discussion. So probably tomorrow we'll start off with maybe what you sleep over it. The reflection after our discussion today in the morning, we'll have maybe 5 minutes reflection of what we have carried home so far. And then we can proceed with the discussion and we wrap it up by 11:30. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good afternoon. So with no comments, I assume that we are all set. Thank you very much. Do have a good day.